welcome to Take Two, the show that looks at the issues behind the news. I'm Henshall. Today we have some news reports, and then I'll be talking to Fran Anderson on the state of play with the proposed trade deal between the EU and US, and Dan Nesbitt from Big Brother Watch. But first the news items. New Indian PM's first call was to China. It should be a big story, but the Western media has dropped the ball. The country is India, and if you blinked you would have missed the election result there. A big victory for the BJP, traditionally seen as the pro-Western and anti-Muslim party. This is globally significant, as the Western powers might have hoped that the Prime Minister Modi would move to dump India's BRICS links and go with the US and its plans to meddle in the Far East. BRICS is the emerging rival to NATO and already includes Brazil, Russia, China, India and South Africa, with Argentina, Nigeria and others considering joining. However, the first phone call India's Modi made to a world leader on winning the elections was to the Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang, inviting Chinese President Xi Jinping to visit India. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is visiting India as early as this month. While the global media outside NATO have reported the story, the NATO media are mostly as silent as they are on Ukraine now that their regime there is killing protesters with indiscriminate shelling of administrative buildings and other non-military targets. Bloomberg did actually cover Modi's election, but listed all the reasons why Modi may not get on well with his neighbours. They failed to mention the planned China visit. Fusion centres in the US. Officials cast wide net in monitoring Occupy protests. Well, that's the New York Times version, based on research conducted by the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, who used Freedom of Information requests and court documents to survey thousands of emails between government fusion centres in the US. Fusion centre structures were set up by the Bush White House to counter terrorism after the events of 9/11. The issue is not, as the Times suggests, how wide the net is cast by the government, but rather the fact that fusion centres were being used at all to monitor Occupy, a legitimate political movement with nothing to do with terrorism. As the progressive website Common Dreams puts it in their version of the report, government used fusion centres to spy on Occupy. New report exposes US government's treatment of social movements as criminal or terrorist enterprises. So, for instance, the report's authors say that police chiefs of major metropolitan areas used the Southern Nevada Counterterrorism Center, Fusion Center, to produce regular reports on the Occupy movement, while the Boston Center was turning out detailed bulletins twice daily. Other reports have established that this political control network was coordinated from the top down. Eventually, the decision was taken in Washington to use police to violently attack the Occupy encampments across the US, presumably with the blessing of President Obama. Another worry is that this new report is based on material the authorities deemed safe to release. Now we know that fusion centres would probably have been making use of real-time access to emails and phone calls collected by the NSA in flagrant breach of the US Constitution. Demonstration to target the BBC. And now for the positive news. The date is Saturday the 21st of June at 1 p.m. The place is London. The People's Assembly have called a national demonstration and free festival against austerity, cuts, privatisation and corporate corruption. This will start from outside the BBC, known to activists as the British Brainwashing Corporation. Speakers include Russell Brand, leftist MP Jeremy Corbyn and Green MP Caroline Lucas. Lots of other organisations are backing the march, which runs from the BBC's London headquarter to Parliament Square. In a previous episode, we interviewed trade justice campaigner Linda Korscher on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, which is due to be signed by the US and the EU later this year. TTIP, it is claimed, will make trade between the US and the EU easier, and jobs will be created in both continents. A powerful lobby group supporting this trade agreement are agribusiness from the meat, dairy and grain industries and some US and EU politicians. Negotiations are in secret and governments are expected to sign an incomplete agreement. There's mounting criticism of the TTIP, and our correspondent Fran Anderson reports on updates since we last covered this topic. Well, Fran.
Well, Ian, as Linda Korscher said, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, is not about trade, but about giving power to multinational corporations, undermining democracy. On May the 19th, 2014, over 250 European organisations signed a joint statement criticising the TTIP and called for the negotiations to be open to scrutiny. Responding to public pressure, the TTIP are setting up an advisory panel. However, critics say any oversight of this panel is inadequate, especially in light of revelations by Edward Snowden, NSA whistleblower, that the NSA was spying on European governments, companies and citizens, including Germany's Angela Merkel. He also revealed that US corporations handed over data to the NSA. So how can we trust any trade agreement with the US when this is going on? This raises concerns over the UK's care data scheme. The NHS is being slowly privatised thanks to the UK Health and Social Care Act 2012, despite massive public support for a properly funded public NHS system. The NHS care data scheme allows US healthcare to access your data. You can opt out by going to your GP surgery and filling in a form.
Okay, so that's the NHS. What are the possible effects of TTIP on food, farming, agriculture, that sort of thing?
TTIP will adversely affect the environment by favouring large agribusinesses over locally sourced food, with even more reliance on oil for transporting food, resulting in increased air pollution. Energy companies will use TTIP to force widespread fracking across Europe despite resistance, and companies that are mining and drilling for oil, gas, fracking and other resources will no longer be required to pay any costs of cleaning up, even from toxic spillages. On farming and food, the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, based in America, lists concerns. Corporations have too much influence and decisions and are secretive. Corporations will be able to sue governments using the Investor-to-State Dispute Settlement, ISDS. Agribusinesses and their US Congress supporters want TTIP food safety and animal welfare standards to be fully enforceable. This means the US government and corporations could sue the EU or any national government on the EU food safety standards, seen as restricting trade. Food safety standards and policies are under threat. Harmonising and reducing regulations mean profits will take priority over food safety, farmers, consumers and animal welfare. Already, American meat and dairy industries are lobbying to reduce animal welfare standards seen as barriers to trade. US corporations want the EU to abandon the precautionary principle, as the US imports would fail the EU's higher standards. The US want the EU to allow more antibiotics and growth hormones in meat and in animal feed, despite the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reporting at least 23,000 human deaths a year are caused by antibiotic resistance. Ractopamine, for instance, banned in over 50 countries, used in the US as a growth agent, mimics stress hormones, causing distress and even death in animals. The US uses chemicals such as chlorine and lactic acid to kill bacteria in meat products and will require the EU to do the same. The US wants faster EU approvals of GM crops to force the EU to allow the use of cloned offspring in farm animals, and for the EU to stop labelling food as containing genetically modified ingredients. The US want restrictions lifted on the use of animal byproducts in animal feed and pet food, despite risks to animal and human health, such as mad cow disease, which is an example of what happens when herbivores are fed dead animals. As Dr. Margaret Chan, General Secretary of the World Health Organization, states, something is fundamentally wrong in this world when a corporation can challenge government policies introduced to protect the public from a product that kills.
Wow. So we've had a whole series of horrendous possibilities in agriculture. Of course, this is all speculation up to a point because we don't know exactly what the treaty does say. We've got the World Health Organization's senior bureaucrat. I mean, it's unusual for people to speak out so strongly from that sort of position. So that's, I suppose, encouraging in a sense. And now, what about the claims that TTIP is going, on the other side, that TTIP is going to help trade, help boost trade? I suppose there's something in that, is there?
Well, yes, Ian, good question. I mean, campaigners are saying that lifting restrictions on substances in animal feed and pet food makes no economic sense. These substances cause risk to animal and human health and have put farmers out of business. In May 2014, the International Trade Union Congress, ITUC, found that 90% of delegates want TTIP scrapped, fearing TTIP will usher in a race to the bottom when it comes to wages and working conditions.
Well, obviously there are benefits, there's theoretical benefits of international trade, economies of scale, all that sort of thing. Is there a sort of good alternative to the proposals? Has anybody done any work on this?
Well, yes, Ian, on the 21st of May 2014, American and European trade unionists called for a EU-US gold standard trade deal that improves working conditions instead of reducing wages, creates sustainable, environmentally friendly jobs, upholds public services, puts an end to privatisation, upholds the right to access for publicly funded good education, healthcare, transport and housing, recognises the right to join a trade union and strike if necessary, and should be negotiated openly and democratically. Richard Trumber, president of an American trade union, said, "Trade policy for the privileged few must end."
Well, I think we can all agree with that, if assuming that is the case. So what can ordinary people do? What can we do to try and fight this sort of secret plans?
People can write to their MPs, MEPs, to newspapers and the media, and they can set up a group in their local area. The EU's chief negotiator for TTIP, Ignacio Garcia Bercero, is taking part in a TTIP promotion with businesses in Madrid, Spain on June the 2nd, and then on to Frankfurt. Meetings will take place in the UK, so check out the World Development Movement website or Stop TTIP website for details, and this gives opportunities for people to organise protests and draw media and public attention to the problems with TTIP. The World Development Movement is coordinating a national day of action against TTIP on Saturday the 12th of July, so people could join in with that as well.
Well, the World Development Movement are a very well established and widely respected campaigning group. They've been around for donkey's years, so they probably will do a good job at running a campaign against it, or even just to find out what it says. Well, thanks very much, Fran.
Thanks, Ian.
Well, now we have in the studio Dan Nesbitt from Big Brother Watch, a UK-based campaign to limit the surveillance state. Dan, thanks for finding the time to come speak to us here. It seems more topical than ever, the name of your campaign, and we'll no doubt find out more about what you do and exactly what you're campaigning on since the Snowden revelations. But let me just start by asking you, what is Big Brother Watch? We've all heard the name vaguely, but can you tell us a little bit more?
Well, Big Brother Watch was set up around 5 years ago to challenge the extent of the current surveillance state, to sort of look into how much the government is infringing on our liberties and our privacy, and also look at the way in private corporations and private companies are doing similar things in collecting our data and analysing it and also infringing on our privacy.
Yeah, and as we now know from Snowden revelations, the private corporations are not that separate from the government. They often hand over the data lock, stock and barrel, it appears. So I gather you do quite a lot of sort of mainstream political work in the UK. I mean, congratulations if you can get the mainstream media to listen to you. You know, you've got to make quite a lot of progress already. Yeah. What are your sort of activities at the moment in Parliament?
Well, the ones we're focusing on at the moment are really looking at how surveillance is operating, looking at the transparency of organisations such as MI5, MI6, and looking at how we can reform them and bring reform the system, that regulates them, and sort of bring them out of the shadows and more into the light, so we can properly look at their activities. Right,
and there's this, we mentioned this in a previous news bulletin actually, there's this issue about the Commons Committee on the Intelligence Committee. It's not a genuine Commons Committee, is it?
No, and that's one of the main problems of the Intelligence and Security Committee. It's not a select committee, although I think both the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Home Affairs Committee have both suggested that it's brought up to the level of a normal Common Select Committee, and that is the membership is properly elected.
Or as the establishment would say, brought down to the level. Sorry to interrupt.
It's okay. So that the three main things we're really looking at to sort of improve it are having a chairman who is from the opposition, not from the current government.
Right.
We're looking at getting it properly staffed, properly resourced, so they can tackle the operations. The operations that when they go badly, and look into them when they go well, and things like that, and also get them to sort of more open up, because CIA directors have been testifying to Congress in public and on TV since 1975, whereas the ISC, their first televised evidence session was just last year.
Yeah. So. I suppose another thing you might argue for is to make sure that whoever's going to go on the committee isn't blackmailable, because if they're listening to all our phone calls, then if you've done anything naughty or even legal but naughty, like having an affair with somebody or something, then they're going to know about it. And if you start making trouble, they're going to let you know that they know about it. And so, I mean, have you got any suggestions for dealing with that problem?
Yeah, obviously, we can look into where the MPs have previously held office. So if they've been, for example, at the Home Office, and then been in contact with MI5 directly, then we wouldn't really want that, because they come with preconceptions. Yeah. But as I could say, it's more about reforming them and bringing them into a proper select committee status.
Right. Okay. So what do you find? The media are quite supportive to some extent about this, aren't they? I mean, how would you, in a nutshell, which are the good papers? Maybe I'm being oversimplistic here, but which are the good newspapers and which are the bad newspapers, as far as you're concerned?
Well, as far as we're concerned, I don't think it really fits into good and bad. We get coverage from across the spectrum. I think it's very much, if we do good work, then the papers will report on it and they'll give us the proper recognition. So if we do our research well, if we do get our arguments across well, then they'll pick that up and they'll trust us to be sort of know what we're talking about.
And that is one of your methods, is you do good research and then you circulate that, and then the media have got something to report because it's new research.
Yeah, we bring out research papers on everything from CCTV to data breaches in local authorities and NHS, to things such as private investigators. So.
Were you involved in this recent campaign to stop the NHS collecting people's data? We reported on that as well.
Yeah, the care data scheme. We were involved in sort of raising awareness of it, because one of the things about it was it really wasn't properly communicated to the public what it would mean, and so luckily we managed to get a 6-month delay into that, but we are at the moment carrying on trying to just raise awareness with other organisations that were within the sort of coalition with us, just to raise awareness of what it would mean to the public and what the potential pitfalls of the plan are.
Yeah, and you've done a lot on surveillance cameras, haven't you? CCTV cameras.
Yeah.
Do you find that to bring the argument that the data just shouldn't be collected in the first place, then you run up against the counter argument, oh yeah, but then people are going to get away with crime and so on? I mean, do you find that argument tends to win in the public minds?
Well, we tend to bring the argument of collect when necessary and when it's proportionate. So with something like a surveillance camera, we would rather than say put them in a fixed location, because that very often just moves the crime to a different place. We would advocate using cameras which you can actually move around. So if you have a crime hotspot, you can put a camera into it, see if it works. If it reduces crime, then great. You can take it down and move it somewhere else. But we were not against wholesale saying no CCTV, no methods like that, but we want to use responsibly and in a good way, because If they're ineffective, then it's costing the government money and it's costing the police time looking through that footage.
Right. Now, yes, and it often doesn't do them much good at all. And I think you've possibly come from Big Brother Watch. You know, these revelations that actually they don't really catch anybody.
Yeah, I mean, there's studies that say that effective street lighting actually cut crime more than a CCTV camera. So
What would
effective street lighting?
Effective street lighting.
Because people are deterred when there's an open street that they can be spotted on rather than just a CCTV camera.
Right. Yeah. And but I've got one worry about your approach, and that is that, you know, we found out through the Snowden revelations and the British equivalent, because we found out a lot about Britain through those, because Britain works so closely with the States. You know, they just ignore the law. I mean, supposing, you know, what we would all like to see, you know, properly regulated, blah blah blah. What's to stop them just ignoring the law, and as they have been doing? I mean, how do you get around that? I don't know what the answer is.
Well, it's as I was mentioning earlier about the Intelligence and Security Committee. That's a part of it, bringing it a properly transparent system so that we have effective safeguards. We have a committee that is properly resourced and adequately staffed to be able to look into the matters of surveillance, look into the matters of our security services, and make sure that because, you know, by and large they do a very good job, they do an effective job, but when there is some sort of wrongdoing, then we want it to be brought out into light. So it's not about catching them out, it's about making sure that people are aware of what they're doing and highlighting the good parts and the bad parts.
And making them realise, I mean, that they are. I mean, there seems to be a culture of, because we're at war, we're always at war with somebody. I don't know who it is at the moment. It used to be Al-Qaeda until quite recently, but now we're allies of theirs in Syria. So, you know, because we're at war, we can do anything we want to defend the public. I mean, you know, how do you get around that?
Well, unfortunately, I don't really know the policy of MI5, MI6 very intricately as not a member of it, and if I was, I wouldn't be able to comment on it. So, yeah, sadly, that's all we can keep pushing for. We're pushing, but.
Just general accountability. Okay, Dan. Well, thanks for that. That's very interesting. We will be interviewing you in the next episode on the internet, particularly, which is where all this is sort of really blown up. And there's two issues that I gather, but that's for next time. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Take Two, brought to you by RADTV and disseminated by The People's Voice. Thank you for watching. See you next time.